The psychology involved with the human brain is extraordinary. Too bad I've lost mine. You may wonder why I say that, because I'm not your typical madman. As you can tell, I can write coherent sentences, and the walls of my house aren't scraped or bloodied with some encrypted message that only I can understand. No, my psychology is fine for the most part, except for 1 week a year where it's lost. I truly don't know where I go or what I become. I'll explain in more detail of when I first started having these weak disappearances, which began after I went alone on a backpacking trip, because I'm an introvert and enjoy seeing nature uninterrupted. I'm not going to say exactly where I was, but I will say it had a good amount of lakes and streams. First off, the small country town I had to pass through before the mountains was interesting, just to say the least. They had signs before you entered the town that read, "No loud music of any kind." I joked to myself, thinking that everyone there looked so old that they probably couldn't even hear it, and I was a year out of college and still immature at this point, so I ignored it and kept my music playing, because I didn't think it was obnoxiously loud. Though when I stopped at a red light and heard an aggressive knocking on my window, I looked over to see an old man tapping his cane and gesturing for me to roll down the window. I did right after turning off the radio. The man's eyes stared me down before he said, "Didn't you read the sign before town? You're scaring the folks around here." "My music wasn't that loud, was it?" I asked while noticing the light turn green. But the man was leaning against the side of my car, so I couldn't leave. "If you want to listen to those tunes, then do it so only you can hear them. Folks around here get squeamish with those sounds." "Sorry, sir. I'll keep them off until I get out of town, but the light is green, so I gotta go." "If you're heading up to those mountains over yonder, it would be best for your sake to keep it off," the man said before letting go of my car and shuffling back to the sidewalk, with his wooden cane clenched tightly in his hand. Wondering why these people were so weird about music, I continued on my way. It wasn't until the few days into the backpacking trip that I remembered what the guy had told me. It was a while I was taking a break after going 3 miles that day on a twisting path. I needed some motivation to keep me going because my calves were still hurting from the hills. So I pulled out my phone, which had less than half a battery left, and put on some song by AC/DC that I had downloaded already. I didn't have any headphones, so I just let it play while sitting beside the trail, remembering the weird town that didn't like music. Listening to the song more in depth, I couldn't understand how. I could maybe understand disliking some types of music, but to say that you hate them all is just insane. However, while I listened to the song, I heard a part that I didn't recognize. It sounded like a piano and didn't really match the tune of the song, and I wondered if I had downloaded some sort of remix, but when I checked it, it showed that it was the original song. So I paused the song, but the piano music still played a soft tune that echoed from off the trail, and I turned my head to see where it was coming from, as it sounded like church music. I wondered if it was coming from another backpacker, but my backpacking bag made it difficult for me to look around, so I unstrapped it and took it off. Standing, I can now better hear the soft, angelic-like music, and feeling as though I lost control of my legs, I started following it. For a moment, I thought that I had died, and I was going to heaven as I tracked further away from the path. However, the once soft music shifted into something off-key and eerie, like whoever was playing before was now having a stroke, and I fell out of the trance to see that I had no idea where I was. The music, if you could still call it that, didn't stop, but grew louder simultaneously while I desperately tried to head back to the trail. Soon the music became faint, and so I thought I was heading in the right direction, until I passed a tree and saw it. The sound stopped almost immediately, and before me was a simple wooden piano, but the keys were the most distinct part of it, with them being white as pearls and the others darker than a black hole. And now that I was face to face with it, I had a million questions on how or why this was put here, but most importantly, who was playing it just barely. I was hundreds of miles away from any civilization, yet this piano looked well taken care of. Clenching my fist before walking over to it, I felt the world stop. To this day, I still remember the resounding silence because no birds chirped, while the wind and distant stream seemed to shut off with the flip of a switch. It felt off-putting and my guts twisted inside of me like maggots squirming in a warm, dead bird. Taking my right hand, I touched one of the keys and slowly applied enough pressure until a note rang out. It was untuned and short, but my hand started to tremble and I saw a drop of blood land on the white and black keys below. Gazing at the bright red drop, I felt my body go limp while my view turned blurry. Now, this is the part that scared me the most because I can remember this scene so vividly in my mind, but nothing else until waking up in my bed at home, perfectly clean as if nothing had happened. Originally, I thought that it was a dream, as all people would, up until I checked my phone that was filled with missed text messages and voicemails. Most of them were from family, but one of my friends, who I'll refer to as Jack, was the first one that I clicked on, which read as follows. "Hey, have you made it out of the canyon yet? Or do you still not have service? Because we're waiting here at the trail marker next to the parking lot, where you told us to pick you up at." The next one after that said, "Dude, it's getting dark, so please respond if you got service. Or else we're gonna call search and rescue because you should already be here and we're all getting worried." And so I then looked at my missed phone calls where there were more than 50. At that moment, my brain throbbed as none of this made any sense to me. My heart soon stopped when I saw that these messages were from a week ago. It's as if I had stopped existing for a whole week of my life, because I had no memory of it. I wondered if I was going insane at the time, and I still do. So in that next moment, I called Jack up and he acted the same way I did, with the main question being, how? How was I able to get back home in a completely different state, without getting a ride or taking a bus, because nothing had been charged to my bank account for this entire week? Which I found out later when I tried to figure out where I could have been in this week by tracking my spending. Long story short, search and rescue called off the search for me and were confused but mostly mad because it seemed like a bunch of young adults playing a prank on them by reporting a false missing person report. But I was really missing and the place where I was unknown even to me. I told my parents and family, who were all worried sick, and none of them believed my story about the piano, blacking out, and waking up nice and comfy in my bed. They all thought I was doing something shady, and my mom asked if I was a part of a gang or doing drugs. And I made up this whole story just to cover it up. Now, to make it clear, I'm in my late 20s, so I'm not a kid, but you know how parents get when they think you're lying to them. They always jump to the most drastic and out there conclusions. So that all happened, and my boss from work was just glad to see that I was okay. But she quickly turned mad, thinking that I might have faked the whole thing. She didn't fire me on the spot because she liked my work ethic, but just gave me a warning to never pull anything like that again. At the time, I promised that I wouldn't, but that ended up being a lie in and of itself. After that whole incident, everyone I knew acted like I was a little insane, but as I went on living my life, they all forgot about it eventually. I didn't, however, as I spent most of my free time trying to figure out different clues. I already mentioned the one where I checked my bank account to see if I had bought anything anywhere, but that showed nothing. And so I searched to see if anyone else had similar experiences online. And that just made me feel weird, as all the experiences similar to mine thought that it could have been aliens who had abducted them, and then would wake up days later in a cornfield or something. Either way, none of the stories I found mentioned a wooden piano, and none of them woke up in their own bed with all their stuff put exactly where it belongs. I don't care how intelligent aliens could be, but they're not smart enough to know precisely where I put my stuff because I'm a perfectionist and like things to be put in a particular way. The only person that could have put all my stuff back in the manner they were had to be me, or at least something that thinks like me. I also thought back to the town that didn't like music, but brushed it off as a coincidence at the time. A few months later, I just stopped searching for answers because it just made me feel insane, as if it took me down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. Nothing weird happened afterwards, though. I thought that it was just some bump in my memory because there was no possible way to explain what had happened. I think the main thing that I thought involved an alien abduction, but that one didn't linger too long because I wasn't about to go around telling people that I'd gotten abducted by aliens, and that's why I disappeared for a week. That was until a year later at the same time, since I had went missing on the backpacking trip. It was exactly 1 year. Keep this in mind because it's important. I disappeared for another week again, and I wasn't even in the woods but on a blind date with someone Jack had set me up with. Looking back, I felt bad for her because I remember meeting and sharing a table near the edge of the restaurant, right next to a window so that we could see the sides of mountains poking out from the city which sat below. The place was one of the fancier restaurants in my city, so I made sure to get a good view. Anyway, we were sharing some funny memories about Jack because he was the only person that both of us knew, and so it grounded us. We were having a great time and laughing from what I remember, until I was taking a sip of my water when a drop of blood dripped from my nose into it. It wasn't a light one, as I quickly set my drink down with more thick droplets of blood dripping out of my white napkin placed on my lap. I then stood up holding my nose while saying something along the lines of, "It must be extra dry this year." She laughed awkwardly, trying to fill the gap of time while I made my way to the bathroom with the door shutting behind me. This was all I remember of the event because I saw the world turn black and white. I couldn't see any color at all, but I could see the now black droplets of blood dripping from my face in the bathroom mirror. I wondered if I was having a stroke as the black and white world started to ripple, while my head felt like someone was pounding on my ears with metal pans. My heart jumped when I heard the faint off-key piano music playing, which slowly grew louder until my senses felt like bursting. All of this turned to nothing as I blacked out again. The next thing I remember was waking up in my bed, perfectly clean. No sign that could prove anything of what had happened. I hoped it was a dream, but in the back of my head, I knew it probably wasn't. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I didn't want to look at it, knowing that I would have to do damage control again if indeed the same thing had happened like before. So hesitantly, I glanced at the screen that was filled with missed messages and phone calls. My heart sunk in what little hope I had that somehow this didn't happen again had vanished. I first listened to one of the voicemails Jack left me, in which he said something like, "How could you just walk out on the date? You made her wait there for more than half an hour until she asked one of the waiters who said that they saw you walk out of the front door. You need to call me right away, and you better have a good reason on why you would do something like that." The next one I looked at was from my work, and I thought for sure that I was fired at the time. But the message left was what I needed to speak to them about my future with the company and all that jazz. I thought for sure that I was as good as gone, but luckily later they let me stay, but I lost my end of the year bonus, among other privileges, as they cut back my lunchtime from an hour to 45 minutes, so I could make up for the time that I had missed. There was so much I had to fix with everyone that I was going through a mental breakdown. I was at an all-time low in my life and never wanted anything more in the world than to know what happened, or where I was during that week. Little did I know that figuring out what happens would make my life a living hell. I'll spare you the time of retelling the 1 week of each year I went missing, because this has been happening in my life for about 19 years now. I've gotten to the point that it's systematic in that I tell everyone ahead of time that I'm going on vacation for this week all alone, so no one wonders where I am. It sucks to lose those vacation days from work, but you gotta do what you gotta do in this case. I had this system down in about the 4th year that I disappeared, and when I came back, I looked at my phone and all of my messages were filled with, "How was your vacation?" and not, "Where have you been?" It was so nice not having to do damage control, and I stopped wasting my time to stop it because it didn't affect my life in drastic ways anymore. I just saw it as a little hibernation, and life was good again, until the 6th year. It started out normal, or what I consider normal with the bloody nose and blurred vision, until I blacked out, expecting to wake up nice and clean in my bed. That didn't happen, but instead, I woke up to hearing brutal, high-pitched screaming. The types of screaming you would imagine hearing while gently being lowered into hell. They got louder and clearer every passing second. My eyes were still blurry, but were adjusted until I could see this inhumanly long pale arm in front of me that reflected the moon's light. It seemed to be climbing a sheer rocky cliffside, with these disturbing fingers that crawled up the rock similar to the way a daddy longleg would. I desperately tried to move my limbs, but nothing budged. The only thing I could control was where my eyes were, and you could imagine how much I was freaking out. The constant screaming turned to tear-filled crying, as I wondered if it was coming from me until I saw the light brown hair of a young boy that was trying to pry himself free from the other pale arm's grasp that clung to the boy's body. Again, I tried to move and wondered where I actually was, and if this pale monster had grabbed me like the boy. Soon the boy's head looked up to meet my gaze, and his eyes were a watery red with tears dripping past his freckles. I heard him scream, "Mom, Dad, help me, please let me go." The boy's eyes were staring directly into mine when he asked to be let go, as if I was the one that had taken him. And then reality hit me hard in that moment. These pale, inhumanly long arms were mine. I looked into the boy's terrified eyes and tried to speak to him, but I couldn't utter a word. The boy's face still scars me to this day. It wasn't much longer until I blacked out again, to wake up nice and clean in my bed, as if nothing had happened. But I knew that was not the case. Something horrible happened, and still happens, and I can't deny it. To continue from where I last left off after waking up from the nightmare of seeing the little boy's terrified face, I was sweating profusely, and a part of me wondered if what had happened was real or just a dream. But that was the first and only time I'd ever had a dream during that week. Plus, this one was too realistic to be fake. I questioned everything about me while looking over my missed messages on my phone, and I wanted to cry when I read one that asked, "How are the California beaches? I can't wait to hear from you." I wiped the tears from my eyes, wishing that I could have actually been there, instead of having to Photoshop myself into other people's photos off the internet. It was like pretending to live someone else's life, while hiding a dark secret that just had turned 1,000 times darker. In the back of my head, I knew what I had to do next. So I quickly got dressed and I ran to my computer and looked up the description of the boy, and put the word "missing" at the end and hit search. My heart sunk to the deepest part of my body when I saw the smiling face of the freckled-faced boy attached with a link. He was a missing person who had disappeared 3 days ago while on a weekend camping trip with his family in State Park Wilderness located in a bordering state to mine. It occurred in the exact same week I had disappeared, and my hands were shaking. I read on and noticed that they believe the boy wandered off and is currently missing in the woods, and do not believe it was an abduction. They currently have search and rescue looking for him, and the idea of calling them up and telling them what I saw crossed my mind. But the same part of me brushed that to the side because they would never believe me in the first place, and it would be self-incriminating telling them that I saw myself carrying the boy while crawling up a cliff with one hand. It sounds insane to me, and that's why I feel insane, because it's hard to tell the difference between what's real and what's not. It was after this event that I reinvested at trying to find some cure for this disease, or at least some answers. My first thoughts went back to the small country town that I drove through up to my backpacking trip that had started this whole thing. The old man acted so strange when I played music, as if it was wrong in some way. Maybe that linked back to the music I heard from the piano. I had to talk to him about it, but there was no way I could because their town was 100 miles away from my own home, and I had no more vacation days that I could afford to lose. So I went on living my life wondering what else I could do instead, and thought about maybe having someone there when I blacked out to make sure that I didn't go anywhere. And if I did, then they would believe me from that point on. So I called my friend Jack after waiting a year, and he agreed to be there at the house when I would disappear. He seemed nervous and curious at the same time when he pulled up. We put in a horror movie because Jack said it would be the only thing scary he would see all night, meaning that he didn't believe me one bit when I told him the whole story. I don't blame him because I wouldn't believe myself either. Anyway, it was about halfway through the movie when a drop of blood dripped from the tip of my nose. It landed on my lap and my heart started to race knowing what would follow. I looked over to Jack and he must have remembered when I told him that a bloody nose was the first sign because his face turned to a stone white. I remember seeing him, arms trying to catch me while I watched his blurry black and white silhouette try to help me. It would be the last time that I would ever see him. This part is hard for me to write, but when I woke up cleaning my bed, the first thing I did was call Jack, but there was no answer. I looked around my house to see if there were any clues as to what happened, until I noticed that his car was still in the driveway. But on closer inspection, I saw a yellow police tape barrier surrounding his car in my house. I opened the door and heard a neighbor mowing grass. They looked at me with their jaw dropped and immediately called the police before bombarding me with questions. Long story short, I was taken into custody for questioning, which was useless because I had no answers to supply them with. They knew as much as I did involving the situation of me disappearing, but it wasn't until they told me that Jack too was missing that reality sunk in. I realized how suspicious I seemed with me being the last person he was seen with, and I can't answer any of their questions on what had happened. I held back my tears with all the strength I could muster, but I was so close to bursting out crying in front of the officers questioning me. I wondered if I had hurt Jack after blacking out, and turning into that thing that no words can explain. I never should have asked them to help me with this because I might have just lost one of my closest friends. They put me under arrest until they found out more information, and I was their #1 suspect with no alibi and really no hope. They let me call my parents and I told them everything, but they didn't believe me. With no one on my side to back me up and a faulty memory, I had no chance of escaping jail time. I never went to jail though, but rather an asylum, because they put me through so many series of lie detector tests and it proved that I truly believed what I was saying. They also never found Jack's body, as if he had just vanished into thin air. After this, I lost the rest of my friends and my family visiting me less and less after every month until it was almost a year. Almost the time that I would disappear again, and I wanted to so badly. Just to prove to everyone that I was not insane, and that this really was happening to me, but I'll go into depth of what happened then in my next post. But you can already tell by how I'm currently writing this that I didn't stay there for the rest of my life. To continue from the last post, it was nearing the time of when the beast in me would finally come out, or at least, that's what I call it, even though 95% of the time I'm completely unconscious during it. I prefer to be unconscious rather than seeing the atrocities I was committing. It's still hard for me to shake the petrified look of the boy in that glimpse I did see while the beast inside was climbing the cliff. Especially now that search and rescue found the body, tucked away in a little crevice along the side of a sheer cliff. It was an impossible climb for someone without the proper equipment. They have no idea on how the boy's body got there and speculate that some sort of animal had dragged him up there because that's the only logical thing they could come up with. They'll never know how or who put him there, but I will. I will until the day that I die, and this dreadful curse will be lifted from me. But until then, I'm still very much a threat to any living being. Anyway, when the night finally came when I would get an answer of what would happen when I would black out here, would I tear down the door and kill everyone in sight? Or would I magically teleport out of here because aliens were involved with this whole dang thing? And while I was pondering it, I saw a drop of blood land on the white sheets that I was laying on. It was a pretty bold color, and I lay there waiting to black out and face the consequences later. But my vision never turned blurry or black and white. Astonished and confused, I wondered if the curse was broken, so I sat up in my bed, and that's when I heard the door open with a creak. It was currently locked and it didn't seem to be opened by any staff members, as no one had walked through the door. That's when I heard soft piano music playing, almost as if it was beckoning me to follow it. Not knowing what to do, but also not caring about my own safety anymore, because my life would never be like it once was. So I followed it into the hallway. Stepping out into the hall, I heard the music sway left while another door opened. I was about to turn the corner when I saw one of the orderlies standing in the middle of the hallway. I thought he was going to escort me back to my room, but he didn't move at all with his eyes, and they were just fixated on the floor. I would have used to think that was weird, but at this point, that was pretty tame compared to what I've seen. So ignoring him while continuing to follow the music, I walked through the door that had previously creaked open, and it led outside to the courtyard area. That's the moment when the blurred vision hit me, and I blacked out, only to wake up in my original bed at my house that my parents had sold. The new owners, luckily, weren't there at the time of me waking up, so I quickly snuck out after getting dressed. I wondered if I should head over to my parents' house, but knew in the back of my head that they would yell at me for breaking out of the asylum, and they would just take me back. Even though that was the last place I would ever want to go. I wasn't insane, but maybe I am. Maybe I really am losing it. Even writing this years later, I'm still asking myself that question. So anyway, while I was walking along the side of the street in the neighborhood trying to figure out where to go, I heard piano music being played and my heart rate went through the roof. I fell to my knees while covering my ears and started crying hysterically. And that's when it suddenly stopped and I heard a house door open. A middle-aged lady stood in the doorway and asked, "Are you okay?" I was teaching my daughter how to play the piano and I heard someone crying out here. Quickly, I wiped away the tears from my face and I kept on walking while saying, "I'm fine." And that's when it hit me and immediately I knew where I needed to go. It would take a ton of walking and hitchhiking, but it's where I would fit in. And so, I found my way back to that small country town. And when I came walking up, all disgruntled and dirty, one of the nice old ladies offered to feed me dinner and give me a place to rest my head. I agreed, and while sitting at the table slurping some soup, she said, "I know why you're here." "Oh, really?" I asked, confused. "It's not every day we get someone like you, but it's also to be expected. It's been a while since we've had another person join the pack, as you can tell. That's why everyone here is so old," she said with an eerie smile. "What are you talking about?" I asked while I stopped eating. "I can tell by the look in your eyes that you touched the piano." I sat silent, not knowing what to say as she continued. "You're just like everyone else in this little town. They've all encountered it and have all gone through the same torment." "You touched it too?" I screamed. "Is there a cure or a way to stop it?" She laughed before saying, "If you're hoping to get a cure for this, then you better give up. We've all tried before to cure it in different ways, such as trying to re-find the piano, but it's never in the same place twice. If we could cure it then, we wouldn't stay here. But as you see, we're all still here. We're like the leopards I talked about in the Bible, who were kicked out of society because of their disease. Like them, it would take a miracle for us to be cured. However, the world doesn't even know about us, and even if they did, they would never believe it was true, so we're safe here. I was shocked hearing this to the point I couldn't respond, but inside, it felt right. I felt like I belonged and I'm accepted instead of locked away and called insane. That's the thing about those monsters in the woods that you hear stories about. They do exist, but people don't come across them all the time because they aren't out there all the time. Instead, they could be the person living across the street from you, or even someone you know. Who knows about that small country town you cross while heading up to the mountains, because for all you know, they could be in it. Like I said before, it's been 19 years since this yearly disappearance started happening to me, and I've still got life to live. So, if you ever happen to be in the woods during the month of July, I would be careful, because one of those weeks, I'll be out there, but it won't be me.